How to change your world instantly. That's exactly what we're talking about here in this video. In fact, I want to share with you not only one, but two ways that you can instantly change your world. Well, first, we have to define what does it mean when we say your world as compared to the world. Now, don't worry, we're going to be talking about both inside this video, but we'll come back to the world in just a moment. But first, let's start with your world. But you might be thinking, my world is the world. And that's where the first opportunity really shows up in terms of creating change. It's recognizing that your world is not the same as the world. Well, how do we know that's true? Well, we each have our own experiences, thoughts, and feelings and beliefs. And that gives each of us a relatively unique view of the world that we call our worldview. So your worldview can and does change all the time. Chances are your worldview is much different than when you were a kid or a teenager. And even if the world is exactly the same, you're different, which means your world is separate from the world. French-American writer Anais Nin said, "We see the world not as it is, but as we are." As we change, so does our world. And let's take a look at how, and then we'll look at two simple ways to create change in our world instantaneously using this simple model of perception. Now let's assume that this is you. This is often referred to as the head model for obvious reasons. And the way we experience the world is we have two forms. We have the external experience of external events that we experience through our senses. And then we have an internal experience that's based on our interpretation of those external events. So the external events, by the way, we experience them through our modalities, our sensory modalities, with the visual, the auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, and gustatory, which is smell and taste, respectively. But the three primary modalities that we use are VAK, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, the sights, the sounds, and the feelings. So as we're experiencing those external events, we're roughly getting around 2 million bits of information per second coming at us. This comes from the book Flow by Hungarian-American psychologist Dr. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who did research on peak experience. And he said, when we're at the peak experience, when we're in a flow state, when things are just going for us, we have roughly 2 million bits of data coming at us, but we don't get all 2 million inside the nervous system, because the reality is that's too much information. So what happens is we have filters that kind of act like a funnel that reduce that to a manageable size. And one of the primary filters we have is deletion. So we take those 2 million and our unconscious mind goes through and sorts through a ton of data and filters it all the way down from 2 million bits per second, mind you, all the way down to about 126 bits. That's a lot of deletion. So we think we're seeing reality, but we're really only seeing a fraction of it, and that's our internal experience. That's what we actually make decisions on every day, is based on the 126, not the 2 million. Now, I'm going to give you some examples and experiences here in just a moment to really help drive this point home. So we experience the world, we have an internal interpretation, internal experience, and that's when we make decisions about what behaviors to make. So we observe the external world, we have an internal experience, and that's what we use to make the decisions in our lives about how do we change the world around us. And I want to give you a couple experiences here to really drive home this point around perception and the fact that we don't really get all the information coming at us. So we could do this with your cell phone, we could do this with your tablet, or even with your computer, but I'm going to kind of simulate up here on the screen for us to make this really, really easy. So I'm going to show you a computer screen with a bunch of app icons displayed here. And I want you to take 3 seconds. I'm going to give you 3 seconds. I'm going to count down 3, 2, 1. And you're going to look and identify, count how many apps you can find that have red in them. All right, you ready? Here we go. 3, 2, 1. All right, welcome back. How'd you do? Now, I know the assignment was to identify how many app icons had red in them, but my question to you is this: how many of the icons had blue in them? Ah, that's the trick. I didn't ask you about blue, but do you know what's the answer? If you're like most people, the answer is you don't know. Why? Because you weren't paying attention to it. All you're paying attention to, if you're like most people, was which app icons have the red. And that's what our brain does. Our brain, based on a number of things, including our values and more specifically our goals in relation to those values, Once we get a goal, such as, hey, how many icons have red in them, our brain starts to filter out or delete all the things that are irrelevant in relation to that goal. So the way our brain kind of works is we're getting lots of data. I like to think about it like this. Think about it like a word search or a word jumble, that there's lots of data coming at us, and some of it's positive, some of it's negative based on how we're interpreting it, and we have a choice in what we pay attention to. If you look at these letters here in front of you, you're undoubtedly able to find maybe some positive words and also some negative words. What determines what we pay attention to is what's inside of us. So I don't care necessarily if you find positive or negative words, that's a matter of interpretation. But more importantly, to think that your brain is awesome. Your brain can look through millions of data every single second and pull out the 126 that's most relevant to you. Now, the common question that comes in relation to this idea about the 126 is people ask, how do I get more? How do I shift my thinking from 126 to 252 and some multiple therein? But the goal is not to increase the number of bits. Even if you went from 126 to 252, it wouldn't make that big a difference in relation to the 2 million bits of data that we have every single second. Instead of increasing the number of bits we pay attention to, the question we really need to think about is, how do I direct my focus onto the most empowering 126 bits? That's how you change your world instantaneously. Now, there are many ways to do this, to change our world, but the simplest thing is to change the what. Change what you're paying attention to in terms of what you're looking at and what you're saying. Change what you see and what you say, and that will change your world. So what you see is what you focus on in terms of the pictures that you have in your head and what you're paying attention to externally. And what you say is the self-talk as well as the questions that you ask yourself. So the two simplest ways to get started in changing your world instantaneously is to change what you see and change what you say. Because there's lots of things out there that can bring you down if you pay attention to them. Politics, the economy, climate change, the list is endless. But there's also lots of things out there that can also bring you up. Politics, the economy, climate change, etc. Why? Because it's not the events. It's our interpretation of those events. It's what we're paying attention to and how we're looking at those events that really makes a difference. So ask yourself a different question. If you don't like what you're focusing on, ask yourself a different question. What am I grateful for? Who do I love? What's positive in my life right now? Ask a different question, get a different picture, and you change your internal experience. Now, this is not about completely ignoring reality. We all know the concept of being optimistic versus pessimistic, glass half full versus glass half empty. Perspective matters. And if you're on a boat in the middle of the ocean and it's sinking, that is not the time to say, well, we could look at it that the boat's half full. That's probably not the ideal way to respond to that particular situation. This is about shifting our perspective, changing our worldview to put ourselves in the most resourceful state we possibly can. So once we change our world, then we can start to work on the world. The inner world begins to change the external world through actions. That's how it works. So Gandhi said it this way: be the change that you want to see in the world. Keep in mind, our inner world is instantaneous. Our outer world, through our actions, takes time. But just remember, if you don't like what you see in the outer world, you can always change what you focus on, ask a different question, and take different actions. And then you can begin to watch those ripple effects impact the world around you. Let me know in the comments, what are the things that you focus on to stay positive and bring light into not only your world, but the world. Now, one other change that we need to address before we wrap up, and that is, did you see the other change? And that is the change of my shirt. While you're doing the screen exercise, I changed out my shirt. And if you saw that, congratulations, you're 126, paid attention to that. But if you didn't, you can go back and watch it. Right around the screen exercise, I changed out my shirt just for kind of some fun to demonstrate that we don't always see everything. Even though we think that we do, we only see a small portion of it. So if you don't like what you see out there in the world, change the channels. There's many more channels you can pay attention to, and you can always find something positive in the external world. So that's it for this one. If you're not opposed to it, hit subscribe to stay connected and ring the notification bell to join the conversation. Until next time, develop yourself, empower others, and lead by example.